Hello, everybody. Welcome into the Bitcoin Made Simple podcast. I'm your host, Corey Tusick. And on this week's episode, I talk with Ashton Forbes. You may or may not have seen him on Twitter, the Twitter X, whatever Elon wants to call it. But he is uh, an individual who is looking into and investigating the disappearance of the Malaysian airlines back in whatever flight number that was back in 2014, which was, always like, I mean, just a sad, tragic story, but also an interesting story because, plane just nobody ever found anything from it. Um, and anyways, he has this theory and been following this theory, but it seems to be backed up by a lot of evidence. Um, so, the theory of how it disappeared and why, all that kind of stuff. Um, and it kind of alludes to some technologies that potentially exist that we don't know about. Um, what really, I know this is a Bitcoin podcast. What really, caught my ear was he was talking about this stuff on Twitter and one of his threads, and he mentioned that that this believes that there is a ability to access free energy. Um, and as a Bitcoin miner, you hear free energy, your ears perk up real quick. Like, come again? Um, so I thought it would be different, and I just thought it'd be fun, kind of different for what I usually, we always talk about Bitcoin and talk about Bitcoin all the time, but I thought this would be interesting. And I don't know, I mean, he's the one that's done the research and kind of laid the story out. It sounds convincing. I'm not a scientist, so I'm not a physicist or anything like that. So I cannot, you know, I did my best to ask questions and kind of follow along. But a lot of what he says adds up. So I think it's interesting. And I think it was just worth, it's a fun conversation. And I think you guys will enjoy it. As always, want to thank the Bitbox O2 hardware wallet. If you guys are new to Bitcoin, since this is a different subject, maybe you're listening for the first time, you're gonna want to go to bitbox.swiss/Bitcoin made simple and use the promo code Bitcoin made simple to get 5% off of your Bitcoin hardware wallet. It is called the Bitbox O2 hardware wallet. Best, easiest, most simple, beautiful, elegant, all the other adjectives I could throw out there. It's a wonderful hardware wallet. And if you are new to Bitcoin, you need to get your coins off of an exchange and you need to get them onto a hardware wallet so that they cannot be confiscated from you. So you should do that. Go to bitbox.swiss/Bitcoin made simple. And then also thanks to Barefoot Mining for sponsoring the show. Barefoot Mining has made it their mission to grow and secure the Bitcoin mining network by bringing a diverse set of operations to life. Barefoot Mining is always looking for more energy and like minded investors for new projects. Barefoot Mining continually seeks partnerships across a variety of energy sources, including but not limited to hydroelectric, stranded gas, flared gas, bioenergy, solar, geothermal, and wind. You can find more about them at barefootmining.com or at barefoot mining on X/Twitter. So, with that being said, without further ado, here's my chat with Ashton Forbes. All right, Ashton. Well, thanks for coming to the Bitcoin Made Simple podcast. And I'm sure I'll mention in the intro to everybody that it's a little bit different of a Bitcoin episode. But I think Bitcoiners will enjoy this. And also there's an energy aspect. So that's where the Bitcoin really comes in for me. But anyways, Ashton, thanks for coming on the show.
Yeah, thanks Corey for having me. I'm glad to be here and talk to your Bitcoin fans.
Yeah, yeah. So I guess before we get into the whole Malaysian Airlines stuff, tell us a little bit about your background and then how did you get mixed up in the Malaysian airplane disappearing?
Yeah, well, my background, I call myself a database architect. I've worked in healthcare IT my whole career ever since I graduated. I would say that's almost 20 years now. So I've been a consultant that works basically. I take hospital healthcare workflows and the knowledge of the computer system and try to optimize that for healthcare professionals, usually nurses and providers, but sometimes ancillary staff as well. And I in college, I was a business major. I majored in finance, marketing, and international business. So I kind of went in a little bit of a different direction. I've always loved technology, science, computers, etc. Grew up in the social media age, and before social media was even a thing. I still remember when I was young, my dad had some of those old Apple computers, not quite the Apple IIe's, but when I went to elementary school, that's what we used. We actually had Apple IIe's where we would play like old school floppy disk
Oh yeah.
games and things like that. So, in terms of like how then I got involved in the whole Malaysian Airlines thing, is I would never have expected anything that's been going on for the last year to ever happen in my whole life. Um, but I've always been very interested in plane incidents in general because for my job, for my healthcare job, I used to travel every single week. I stopped eventually because it started to wear on me. But for 7 years straight, I traveled every single week, and I've always been terrified of flying. Like, even though you would say, well, how do you fly so much if you do that? Like, you just get over it after a while, but it doesn't make you any less terrified. And I'm one of those people too that like I keep the window shut. I just don't look out the window or anything like that either. You could say it's like a fear of heights, etc. And I remember following the Malaysian Airlines incident in 2014, and it was so weird. It was one of those things where like you wanted to know every little update because it didn't make any sense right from the
Mhm.
beginning. Like they kept telling us like, oh well, this plane disappeared at 1840 UTC, but when you did the basic math of where they said this plane went dark, you're like, no, that's 1721 UTC. Like, why is there this discrepancy? And like, why are we searching over here? And then all of a sudden we're searching over here. So for common people, because for the people that are younger that are listening to this, you have to realize how weird it played out in the media. It made no sense at all. And so 10 years later, even like we had never found the plane. And the tiny amounts of debris that we found ended up washing ashore on the wrong continent. I still remember back when they were like, oh, somebody found some debris. And this was a year after the plane disappeared. Some random people find it. The official search finds nothing. And then you find out, well, they found it where? In Africa? You're like, I thought we've been told this plane crashed in the South Indian Ocean. Like, why is the debris now washing ashore in Australia? So even before I got into all this, I knew that somebody knows more than what they're leading on regarding this because in 2014, let's just keep it simple. Planes do not disappear, period. That's the basis that people need to start with. Planes do not disappear. It's not possible. And that the United States military is the best surveillance apparatus on the entire planet. We've got spy satellites everywhere. We've got this sound surveillance system called SOSUS, which pinpointed that tiny Titan sub imploding near the Titanic.
Yeah.
And we've got something called over the horizon radar, which radars bounce off the ionosphere and then they can see and detect craft for thousands of miles. And we've got two military bases that could have tracked the plane from takeoff to crashing. And yet, nothing, nothing at all. The United States government has never really issued any formal statements. They stopped being involved in the search after 1 month. And yet the United States government was also really connected to, they're the ones that spread the narrative. Unnamed intelligence sources are the ones that spread the narrative that the plane went into the South Indian Ocean. This satellite ping company, Immersat, which is how we've determined like random bloggers basically determined this plane went into the South Indian Ocean based on these Immersat pings. Like no official officials actually did that math. It was just random bloggers did it. And they're tied to US intelligence as well. So I knew the United States government knows way more about what happened to this plane. So then rewind until a year ago. It's actually been basically almost exactly 1 year. These videos reemerge on social media on the site Reddit, UFOs subreddit. And I'd seen, I've been following some of this UFO stuff for a few years. I've seen some like lights and things like that. And just a few videos that are like, oh, that's pretty interesting. But nothing like this, and most people's initial reaction is the same reaction as me. Is like, what is this? Is this like a video game I'm looking at here? And if the more knowledge you gain, though, about what our drones look like, what we're capable of, what our satellites are capable of, what satellites even are right now, you start to realize like those videos are actually real. That's actually what happened to the plane. Um, and for the people that think, oh no, that's got to be some video games or what have you, all I say is that I saw the drone video in 2014. I remember vividly seeing the color drone video, and it just like you have this reaction where just like you kind of just ignore it because you have no basis to understand what something like that would even look like. We didn't in 2014 we didn't have any drone videos that were in the public view that anyone thought were real. Um, so when I saw it again, and then I saw the second video in perfect synchronization from a completely different angle, I went, wait a minute, this is weird. And that's when I started investigating the videos and the missing plane because I thought, something isn't right here. And if those videos are real, which I know is very difficult to believe, then everything should line up to being them real. It should mean that there should be a bunch of evidence around this disappearing plane that lines up to those videos and location of those videos being the real location where the plane disappeared. And possibly more importantly, the science about what we see in those videos, because we're literally watching a plane just disappear like that. The science should also check out. And it turns out it all does. So that's how I've got to the point where I am now, where I'm maybe an investigator. I'm also somebody who I don't really call myself a physicist, but I've pretty much been teaching quantum mechanics to people on live streams for the better part of a year as well. And I'm getting to the point now where I don't even recognize who I was 9 months ago when I began the science journey. So those are the things that are exciting to me.
Wow. Wow. Okay. Um, so to give people a background, like, we all know that the Malaysian flight that went down in 2014, I mean, even to the most, you know, random person, it was something, nothing added up, and like the official narrative still is that we don't know,
Yep.
we don't know what happened. Um, Now, I don't know if do you have the video handy? Like
Sure.
I gave you the sharing options if you want to share it real quick, just for
Yeah,
people that are
definitely.
watching on the YouTube
And let's,
who haven't seen
I've
it.
got a few little videos here that will help because first, I think it's great to visualize what happened with the plane. And
Hmm.
I will skip over some of my commentary here, but I'll share this video. Can you see this?
Yeah, yeah. So if you're
Yeah, I think
watching
it
on
was
Spotify or YouTube, you can see it, but we'll do
okay.
our best for the listeners to
Yeah, so for
understand.
the listeners, this plane was going from Kuala Lumpur to China to Beijing, so it's flying northeast. And the point where the plane disappears is at 1721 UTC over the South China Sea, which is northeast of Malaysia and east of Thailand. And then this is the part where there's all these witnesses that have all just been discredited, but this is the part where Mike McKay sees this plane from an oil field and they've discredited his sighting, even though it makes no sense why he would make up something like this. But they said, oh, he was too far away to see it. But this was like a perfectly clear night. It had just rained. This guy's on an elevated oil rig. And, potentially maybe he's seen the reflection of the plane off of the ocean. It's hard to say exactly, but he sees the plane in the exact right direction and he sees it on fire for a few seconds and then not on fire anymore.
Huh.
Now, after this is the part where, like, from this point, nobody knows anything until days and weeks later. And then the Malaysian government says, oh, yeah, we were tracking this on military radar. We just didn't say anything about it. And you're like, wait, what? They're like, oh, yeah, we were tracking on military radar. And it turned around and it went back over the peninsula of Malaysia to the west. And this is why everyone's like, wait, but we're searching in the South China Sea, and now you're telling us it flew back over your country the other direction. And yes, it flies back over the country the other direction, and it flies towards Penang. Now, I've heard other people also claim it flies towards Langkawi, and Langkawi is a small island just north of Penang here as well. Apparently, they both have airports that have runways long enough to accommodate a Boeing 777. And this is important because this plane is clearly going somewhere to try to land at this point based on the flight path.
Hmm.
This was like a hijacking scenario. You're not going to Penang. This indicates like an emergency event scenario. And then when it flies over Penang, the co-pilot's cell phone pings a cell tower. So for everybody says that this basically indicates they were trying to get help or something at this point. And then the big question is, well, why don't they land there? And it could be that it was not safe. So the scenario that I've put forth that I've uncovered from all this is a fire event, the same thing that Mike McKay sees. And later on, Catherine T in this boat over to the west in the Nicobar Islands, she sees the plane glowing orange with smoke coming out of the back of it. And why would they not land then at Penang? Well, I spoke to Billy Vincent, who was a former director of security for the FAA. And this was actually just a couple weeks ago. And you can find old articles about it where he had actually predicted a fire event even before we knew that there was lithium ion batteries on board this plane. That's why I wanted to talk to him. And he said, well, there was this other aircraft, UPS Flight 6. And this flight had lithium ion batteries on board. I think it was in 2010 and had a very similar scenario to what happened to MH370. And what happened in that case was one of the pilots went to go get oxygen just basically right behind their chair and passed out immediately from the smoke. That's how fast the smoke took them out.
Huh.
And then they couldn't land because the smoke was occluding the vision. Now, keep in mind, not only would the smoke potentially have been blocking their view, it was also pitch black in the middle of the night. So if they have no lights, now it's extremely dangerous. Maybe that's why they couldn't land at Penang. So instead, what do you do after that? If you can't land safely on the ground, the next thing you're supposed to do, based on the flight manual, is do a water ditching. But now, if you try to ditch this plane in the ocean, especially in the middle of the night, it's not a good recipe. So you would need support. You would want like military to come and, be
Guide you
right
down to
there
the
when it
water.
goes down. Well, what was going on over here in Thailand at the time? Cope Tiger and Cobra Gold exercises. They were actually just right between the two. The one had just ended and another exercise was just going to begin between Thailand and the United States. So you're telling me we've got military exercises going on here between the United States and Thailand in this area right here where this plane is flying in the Malacca Straits and the Andaman Sea. And Malaysia and Thailand and the United States don't know what happened to this plane? Wait, you really think that we have rogue Boeing 777s flying past our military exercises and we're not tracking them? Now, it makes more sense if this was an emergency event that what they might have been doing here is rendezvousing. And then people would say, well, why are there no Mayday calls? Well, who says there's no Mayday calls? Why do we believe that the last communication was at 1919, 64 seconds before this plane went dark? Why do we believe that? We just believe that because that's what we've been told. That's the only communications they've released. What if there are more communications? In fact, there's a China Times report that was released the next day that says they intercepted a communication from the U.S. Navy's base in Taipei in Thailand, that the plane was disintegrating and attempting an emergency ditching or an emergency landing in the ocean. Now, why is this so huge? Because what we're going to see in two videos in a second, that we've got a plane flying low, descending, circling, attempting an emergency landing in the ocean with smoke coming out of the back of it. And we've got our final witness, Catherine T, on this boat. She was going to Phuket, Thailand from India. She sees a glowing orange plane with smoke coming out of the back of it. The glow of the orange would not be necessarily from the fire, but potentially from bromine, a halogen gas that's inside the fire extinguishing devices. They use Halon 1301. You guys can go look that up. This plane was on fire for an hour, and they're battling this with this Halon fire suppression devices. Could be releasing bromine, which is why it looks like it's got this glowing orange haze to it, according to her. And if you go look back at her old blog post from like 2014, it looks just like a halogen lamp. And I ended up talking to her back in October of last year. And she didn't see what we see in the videos, but she seems to have seen an event that's very consistent with a fire event,
Hmm.
with the plane descending and flying very low as well. So hopefully this helps people to visualize. And the last thing I want to say on this is that this location where we've got Catherine T in the Nicobar Islands seeing the plane, this is also the location where the narrative now says this plane turned into the South Indian Ocean. The only reason we believe this plane turned into the South Indian Ocean, I want to repeat this, the only reason we believe this plane turned into the South Indian Ocean at this location is the Inmarsat satellite pings that were analyzed by bloggers. That's it. That's the only reason.
Hmm.
There's not been any corroboration of that. There's no other evidence that corroborates it. We found nothing in the location that the pings say the plane should have ended up. There's no witnesses that saw it in the Indian Ocean. Nothing. So when it comes to highly credible evidence, this is where it ends at this point here. And this is important because the location where Catherine T's boat is, just about 90 miles away, that's where we have coordinates in the satellite video I'm about to show. Wow. Why is that important? Because the satellite video was published 8 days before the raw telemetry data of those satellite pings was ever made publicly available. So someone's got to explain to me, how would somebody know where to put coordinates in the bottom of your satellite video that nobody even knows exists, that can even do a satellite video, where the raw telemetry data that the bloggers use to determine the flight path of the plane wasn't even publicly available yet? Before that, a lot of the scenarios predicted that this plane flew right over Indonesia,
Okay.
and that it must have flown over Indonesia and then to the south. Because why would you fly around Indonesia in this like roundabout path around the islands of Indonesia? Doesn't make any sense. You'll hear some experts, I use this term very loosely, claim that, oh, they were trying to avoid radar. That's not how you avoid radar. And also, there are 5 radars still in range of this plane at the time where it says last location tracked by Malaysian military radar. There's still 5 radars in range here, 3 from Indonesia, 1 from Thailand, and 1 from India. And this comes from an aeronautical 2019 Royal Aeronautical Society uh, presentation that they did. I took a screenshot of it. So we know that these other countries must have seen the plane on radar. Indonesia's excuses, they're the only ones who even came up with an excuse. Their excuse is the radars were off that day. What? Sorry, what? India and
We
Thailand, their
rebooted them.
excuse, there's no excuse. They've never said anything about it. You Does this make any sense to anybody that's out there? Like some people try to claim, oh well, Malaysia never asked Thailand or India. Like, why should they have to ask? You've got an international incident with a missing passenger plane. These countries should be saying, here's the data, we were tracking it, we saw the plane here, you guys can see this. So you should be asking yourselves, why is there a cover up related to this? And
Hmm.
who could cover up Thailand, India, and Malaysia? Which countries out there would be capable of doing that? In my opinion, there's only one: the United States of America. So let's look to the next video. So these are the MH370 videos. You can still see this, right?
Hmm.
Okay. One thing I want to point out here as well, some people think this is CGI. These are real clouds. Nobody has denied what we're looking at here are real clouds. This is not CGI. This is not VFX. Those are real clouds that we're seeing in this video. A lot of people, it's kind of embarrassing that I have to keep saying this because people are going to say, well, the clouds don't look like they're moving. People need to just take a basic physics test, and you don't even need to take a basic physics. Just look outside. I'm looking outside right now out of my window at clouds in the sky. They look stationary, and it's only a few miles away to those clouds that are right there. If this is a satellite video, this satellite is potentially 900 kilometers away. So the further away you get from something, the less movement there appears to be. That being said, these clouds objectively move. Not only do they move, they evolve. So this is not a situation where these clouds are static. This is not a static background. This is actually real clouds that actually really move. It's really hard for people to accept this because when you start to accept some of these details, you start to realize there's no chance in hell these videos can be fake. Uh, now, this plane right away, you can see the smoke coming out of the back of it here. You see it's kind of bulky as well. And the reason why it's probably bulky is because when planes fly in the air, they give off extra infrared radiation. They absorb radiation the higher up they are in the sky.
Mm.
And satellites these days are not optical generally. There's only 5 optical telescopes or satellites left in the United States that are owned by the United States. The rest are all infrared and radar. And why is this? Because the same reason why we have like a satellite fly past Pluto, and then we get a beautiful image of Pluto from just a satellite flying past it at, I don't even know, tens of thousands of miles per hour. It's because they take the data and they rebuild it into a visual representation. And that's what we're doing on the planet all the time, using something called SIBRS, Space-Based Infrared System. It's actually a constellation of satellites constantly scanning the entire globe. And real quick, I'm just going to show a very quick visualization of that, and we'll come right back to this.
Okay.
Because this is Lockheed Martin's website here. This is from their website, and this is the scanning right there. Look at that scanning. They're scanning the entire globe.
Huh.
This doesn't even include the low Earth orbit satellites, which have been incorporated into the SIBRS constellation. So you can imagine here, there's nowhere to hide on this planet. If you just look at how big some of these scans are, I'm going to skip ahead here. Look at how big some of these scans
Mm.
are. These things are scanning everything. So how does this work then? Because if you have a scan like this, you're not visually looking through this. you're sending this to ground-based computer systems, and then
And
they're
these are
using the
confirmed that they're out
software.
there, right?
Oh, 100%. I mean, unless if you're a flat earther, I have nothing against you. The
Yeah.
Earth's not flat, but you're welcome to believe it. They generally believe that space and satellites are fake or whatever, but no, satellites are real, and
Yep.
this has been confirmed. This constellation was online in 2013, the year
Huh.
before the plane disappeared as well. So it's crazy. A lot of people don't know about SIBRs. And right at the beginning, it says global infrared, persistent infrared surveillance, which I mean, you just listen to those, global persistent infrared surveillance. Those words are pretty clear in terms of what they do. If you don't, if the visualization isn't enough, the end is my favorite part though with the Lockheed Martin. I'm just gonna let it play out because there's only like 10 more seconds on it. It says, Lockheed Martin, we never forget who we're working for, which of course is the United States government. Um, so
That's
we
perfect.
think that this is what we're looking at with respect to this. And the reason why we think that is in the bottom left of this video. If you look very closely in the bottom left, it says NROL 22. That's the first launch of the SIBR system in 2006.
Hmm.
There's a Newsweek debunk. There's so many fake debunks out there that this should also be concerning. Is like rarely do videos have this many fake debunks associated with them. There's a
Usually red
Newsweek
flag.
one. Yeah, usually a pretty big, especially when Newsweek, the day after, August 9th, the day or 2 days after these videos reemerged, Newsweek immediately drops this weird debunk that claims that no, it says NROL 33 in the bottom left, and NROL 33 wasn't launched until 2015 or something like that. Therefore, it can't possibly be real. But you just look at the bottom left and you can tell it doesn't say, it's not NRL 33, it's NRL 22. That's the only fact in the entire Newsweek debunk, and it's objectively false. You're like, so who is trying to make these videos disappear? Who controls Newsweek and can convince them to put out a debunk out there, which even Tim Goulet he's the admiral in the Navy or whatever, he's in this UFO community. Even he went on Chris Leto and said, oh, he was asked about these videos. And this guy, you tell me he doesn't know about our SIBR system, our space satellite system. He goes, oh, well, I remember reading a Newsweek article that said that that was debunked. And I'm like, oh my God, really? Like, I can't tell if he's just lying or if he's just completely incompetent. I don't know. But there's also coordinates. Now, we'll talk about this orb that just appeared on the screen, but notice that when the perspective changes, the coordinates change as well, but they only change when the coordinates change. And those
Mhm.
coordinate shifts are real. Like it's not just random numbers flipping up and down. Like those are real shifts. Not only that, we were able to map this out. So the amount of like research we've done in these videos is just incredible because when you graph this out, you realize that this must be the Nicobar Islands, like the same location where Catherine T saw, because you can plot it on a map and you go, oh, those coordinates are the Nicobar Islands right there. You can see enough of the coordinates to make it out. And initially, like I was like everybody else thinking this plane went in the South Indian Ocean. And I thought there must be a hidden minus sign in front of the first coordinate, the north-south coordinate. Because when you do that, then this coordinate is somewhere in the South Indian Ocean, pretty close to where they claim this plane went. And I was like, okay, there must be a hidden minus sign. But if you graph it with the minus sign, you would have the plane going north into the east, which makes no sense if the plane's flying south into the South Indian Ocean.
Mhm.
But worse than that, if a plane is going north into the east, hopefully this is correct for you guys seeing it. Maybe it look like this. Then your plane would be turning to the right, right? You fly north, you turn to the east, you're turning to the right. What is this plane doing? It's turning to the left. In fact, it's turning to the left in both videos. This proves that there is no minus sign. What we see there are the real coordinates, and that this is the Nicobar Islands. This plane is flying south and to the east in this, doing like a circle type maneuver here as well. I'm going to rewind it just for a second because I want to show this orb coming in. Several people have tried to recreate these videos. No one's come remotely close. And the one thing that no one can even begin to try to recreate is how fast these orbs are coming in and the realistic physics, despite the fact that it seems to be defying the laws of physics from an engineering perspective, from a scaling it down perspective. They're going at like 2,000 miles an hour. And right away, this first orb circles around the side of the plane. There's some kind of resonance or homing mechanism going on here, and it locks in. Now, what you'll notice is the second and third orbs take like 5 or 6 seconds. And then when they come in, they're already locked in immediately. And they're locked in this weird triangle formation. The second orb comes out of the water. And this second orb immediately here is going to lock in. And right now you can already see them. They're locked in a triangle formation where like the third one's missing. Like you can
Mm-hmm.
imagine there's a third orb. They're already in this perfect equilateral triangle because when the third orb comes in and just like 1 second later, it goes directly into the right spot. So the second and third orbs don't need to lock in at all. The first one locks in, the other two just get into formation. And the third orb comes flying in immediately in triangle formation. And then once they get in triangle formation, it's almost like they shift their orient, like they were going one way and now they're in the right spot, and then they start their pattern and they start spinning around the plane. Now, I'm going to show you guys something else right here, and then I'll come back to this in a second, which is that this orb displaces the smoke. You can see it right there. So we can see this
Huh.
smoke coming out of the back of the plane. This is not contrails. The plane is flying too low, so it's physically impossible for that to be contrails. And we know because we see cumulus clouds in the background. Cumulus clouds only form at very low altitudes. So this plane is flying low. And based
Where it
on
goes right through the smoke.
yeah, I mean, you could clearly see with this color change. We didn't notice this until about 2 months ago when somebody did color change versions of the videos. And then when you see it from here, you can actually look at the original that I was just showing you, and you can see it very faintly that it does actually displace that smoke. This shows that what we're looking at here is not something that was added on. These orbs were not added into like another video of a plane. Like this is accurate fluid dynamics that we're seeing here as well. So this shows the smoke is real and the orbs are a real physical object as well. So to me, nobody's ever been able to try to refute this as well. And usually, what you find from debunkers is that their logic is if I can poke one hole, then that means your thing is fake.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how they operate. And then they don't address anything that proves them wrong. So you have this like huge disparity of what the criteria is for proof versus the standard of evidence for proving something fake. Because in order to prove something's real, they demand this much proof. And in order to prove something's fake, they just demand like this tiny little amount, any one little thing that we can get. This is why it's so easy to hide this type of technology from the world, because we've just become so cynical and skeptical these days. Even when we're looking at real satellite video and real drone footage, people don't believe it. There should be enough that we see the coordinates in the bottom, but even if that's not enough, the fact that we see this mouse come on the screen. So in the middle of the screen here, people think, oh, is this a bird? This is the cursor of the mouse. It came from the top right of the screen, off the screen up here, and then went down to the bottom left down here. Or if you guys, if I'm backwards, whatever, you can see it. This means that we're looking at a cropped field of view. Again, not only does everybody agree we're looking at real clouds, everybody also agrees that this is a much bigger field of view that was cropped. So you're
Mm-hmm.
telling me somebody hoaxed a video where they made a giant field of view with real clouds, and then they cropped it down, and then added a cursor going over the top of it. Like, there's no such thing as hoax videos that have this much detail in them, especially when you realize that this cursor's at a different frame rate than the background.
Mm.
How would that, if this video is hoaxed,
They'd
couldn't
all
you
be the same
immediately
frame
believe
rate
that they
for
would
sure.
all be the same frame rate? The reason why they're different frame rates is because the background's a real satellite video or a real database that's computer generated over a large field of view. So its frame rate is lower, 6 frames per second. The mouse, the cursor, is a Citrix session. You're logged in remotely to a remote terminal. So it's like me logging on my laptop I have here to my work. When I log into my work every day, the data is not physically stored on my laptop. It's stored somewhere in a hard database farm somewhere else. This is working in healthcare IT. This is how all hospitals operate. So, like when the clinicians are logging in the hospital to the computers, the database that's storing that information isn't there in the hospital. It's somewhere else. Same exact concept here with the satellite stuff. And a lot of people don't realize this. Maybe this is where my healthcare IT expertise came in handy to be like, this is because that's the part where I'm like, there's nobody's faking that. That's not a thing that's ever been faked in any hoax video in the history of the world. Um, and mostly what people don't believe is they just can't believe what they see. They can't believe, and this is why the science part ends up becoming so important. The issue isn't like if there was no orbs in this video and this plane doesn't disappear, no one will question the veracity of this video.
Mm-hmm.
It's the science that they can't accept and understand. And everybody thinks a lot of people think this must be aliens as well. Um, there's nothing. I don't see any aliens in this video. Do you? Like I don't see any little
No.
green men or anything. All I'm seeing is some weird orbs, and I think these orbs are actually made out of plasma. Now I'm going to rewind one more second here. I want to point out that the orbs change their orientation right here and they become vertical. So
Mm-hmm.
now we can tell there's clear purpose going on. I believe that they're mapping this plane initially to determine exactly how big, maybe the mass of the plane, because what they're about to do here, in my opinion, after researching the science, is produce a wormhole. They're producing a rip in space and time, which is literally teleporting this plane from one place location to another. Now, if you watch very carefully here, and I'm going to slow it down just a little bit, you'll notice when this plane gets to where this cloud is in the middle of the screen, the orbs actually slow down just a slight amount. If you watch very closely. So right about here, they slow down just a little right there. You can kind of see them slow
Uh-huh.
a little bit.
Just your mid-show reminder to get a Bitbox O2 hardware wallet. Go to bitbox.swiss/Bitcoin made simple. Use promo code Bitcoin made simple to get 5% off.
And then you can't really see it in this video, but in the next video, you're going to see they actually converge on the plane in the last second as well, which is a very bizarre behavior. Now, the
And
operator
it's
here,
just and
whoever
it's
is
just gone.
filming this, they're like, yeah, they scroll over to the right because they want to show whoever's viewing this video, like, this plane's just gone. It's not hiding over here to the right. The smoke trail just stops dead in its tracks as well. So, like, I wanted to believe, like, maybe this is some kind of cloaking that they did, but the smoke trail just stops. Like, there's a smoke trail and it just stops right there. I'm like, come on, can the smoke trail at least keep going here? I don't want to have to
Uh-huh.
explain a wormhole to people. It'd be much easier if I can be like, no, they just did some advanced cloaking to it or something like that. And if this was an annihilation event, then like this would be like a thermonuclear reaction. Like we'd be seeing like a mushroom cloud, like destroying part of the planet.
Yeah, all that carbon has to go somewhere.
Yeah, that has to go somewhere, right? So this is the thing. We do have to be consistent with the laws of thermodynamics. Energy can't be created or destroyed. If we move that energy from one location, it has to appear somewhere else. So this is the main reason why the main theory is teleportation. Now, I don't like the word teleportation because it evokes this idea of Star Trek teleportation, and that's
Mm-hmm.
not what we're talking about. When we talk about teleportation, we're talking about manipulating the vacuum, manipulating space time. And it does get weird because, like, we literally just watched a plane disappear. But you have to realize that what we perceive as this surface that has this vast distance between it is just an illusion. And that if you were able to break through this illusion of space time, every point in space and time are connected. And that's what's happening with this plane. It's actually cracking through the fabric of our reality. And once you do that, you can be anywhere. And how do we know that this is even scientifically sound? We can look at the double slit experiment. And what we realize is that at the quantum levels, things are in something called superposition. So they can be anywhere. And it's not until we observe them that they have a definitive point in space and time. Probabilistic point in space and time versus definitive. And if we can scale this up to the macro level, which is like a unification of quantum field theory and general relativity, then it would allow for the concept of teleportation, just like we saw in that video. So this video is the second video. This is the one that I originally saw in 2014, which I just thought, what am I looking at here? I didn't really get it.
Mm-hmm.
Right away, though, you can tell this is a drone. This is
Mm-hmm.
an MQ-1 drone. We believe it's MQ-1C, but all these drones have the exact same body shape, so we can't know exactly which one. Now, we also notice the camera is not underneath the nose of the drone. It's on the wing.
Mm-hmm.
So when you look up MQ-1Cs, you'll see that these have aerial surveillance packages and they have cameras that are underneath the wings on these aerial surveillance packages. So you guys can find them. A lot of people don't think that's where they have cameras, but they have these custom loadouts where they can remove a missile and add a camera or different packages on there that they want. The other real dead giveaway right away, this is legit, as you can see this heat signature on the nose of the drone. That's exactly where the computer brain of the drone is as well. So imagine your computer is right there in the nose of it. Of course, it's going to heat up and you're going to see a little heat coming out of the side. If this was a fake video, there wouldn't be a little heat signature right here as well. It's too specific of detail. Not to mention the fact that nobody's ever seen a video like this. So, in fact, neither video, no one's ever seen anything like this in the public. So there's nothing to copy from. These would have to be wholly, creations from whole cloth. Anybody who's a real VFX expert, there's a lot of fake VFX experts out there that just pretend. The real ones know that you need a reference when you make something. That's why when they
Mm-hmm.
do CGI movies and stuff, they have people with the little dots all over them because they take somebody moving around realistically and then they basically paint over it.
Yep.
In this case, there is none of that.
Yeah, which I
Um,
mean, if you don't have, yeah, that's my background as the movie industry. I mean, if you don't have a point of reference, it's literally animation.
Exactly. And then it would be you're making this from you're just making this from scratch. And
Yeah.
if you're making this from scratch, realize that the maximum amount of time, the maximum that somebody could have if they started the very moment the plane disappeared is 70 days. 70 days to make these videos from scratch. No chance. You have to come up with a story, a location, like all this stuff. We have again real clouds. Like
Yeah.
this stuff, it's so difficult. So here, the drone, you're gonna be able to see the shake increases when it goes underneath the wake of the plane. You can actually see the smoke stack up accurately here as well. So all these small details are like you only see this level of detail in real videos. You don't see this level of detail in CGI stuff. These are the small details like the smoke stacking up here that people would miss and mess up. Also, when it zooms in right here, there's actually 3D dynamic parallax. It's very slight, but you can actually see like the little bit more from like the sides of the clouds. So what we're looking at is like real clouds there again. And then also here, notice the shake increases.
Mm-hmm.
So the shake increases accurately when the camera zooms in. Just like if you take your camera and you zoom in, yeah, and you start moving your hands, it's more noticeable as
Mm-hmm.
well. There's also a little bit of delay. Why is there a delay? Because the person who's operating this is not in the drone. They're maybe even thousands of miles away. So you're going to have a lag. That's just, again, basic physics. This is why they're struggling to keep the plane in the center of the field of view. A lot of time with these fake videos, you see that the UFO or whatever is like perfectly in the frame every time.
Mm-hmm.
In this case, it's not because there's somebody literally struggling to keep it in the field of view. Now, why were they filming this? People are going to ask. Of course, they always ask. You should be able to answer this question yourself. Like, how is that drone there filming it? There's really only one answer, right? This is an operation. Why
Mm-hmm.
is it so close to the plane? Why is the drone there at all? They're not randomly filming this plane. They're not flying around. Oh, look, there's a plane that's turns out that's missing. That's going rogue right now. Let's go film that. No, they either are intercepting this plane because of the fire event that we mentioned, or this whole thing was an operation, which makes more sense to me because we've also got this giant cover up where they're trying to convince people this plane went into the South Indian Ocean where we find nothing. And there's only, in my opinion, one country on the face of the earth that can pull that off. And then why are they filming with the drone? Like, why even risk this? I imagine that while this technology is pretty incredible, if we've figured this technology out, I don't think we figured out how to teleport a plane like in the 60s. Like this might be relatively new. And so why would you film it? You want to give the intelligence back to the engineers. So you can say, hey, remember when you made that wormhole weapon? Well, here's how it works right here.
Mm-hmm.
And so because you have theories, right? But you want to see in practice how does it play out? How does it work? I'm going to slow this down to quarter speed. I want you to see how accurate these orbs are. We can see a heat signature in these orbs. Only recently I've been able to pretty much confirm scientifically this is consistent with the magnetic monopole. Basically, these orbs are producing a very tiny black hole in them that induces this particle antiparticle creation. And when you do that, the electric charges cancel out, but that leaves a magnetic field, which produces a magnetic monopole. Imagine a magnetic monopole. Instead of like your north and south, you have just a north or just a south. So you're going to have things pulling in or things spreading out.
Mm.
That's apparently consistent with this heat signature we see with these orbs. Imagine creating this frame by frame with this heat signature in the belly of the plane. The
You
orbs
see the
are going
flames
through
coming,
the
yeah.
smoke here. Like, look at the orbs going through the smoke accurately being like visually displaced by it as well.
Mm-hmm.
To me, these details are far too advanced for somebody to be hoaxing. And that's not even all the details we're going to get to. One more thing I'm going to go back for just a second. Is this heat signature here in this belly of this plane is morphine, and that's not in the engine. This heat signature in the belly of the plane is what we think is smoke coming out of the heat exhaust ports, the AC exhaust ports on the belly of the plane. In certain frames, you can tell that the smoke does not line up with the engines at all. So why are there two? Because it's wrapping around both exhaust ports around the hull of the plane and then going back. And then here, this is my favorite shot with the orb. Look at the heat signature on this orb. It looks
Huh.
like the little Tesla sign right here. There's actually on the Department of Energy's website, their wallpaper. They talk about plasma physics and in research in plasma physics. They have an orb that looks just like this heat signature on the Department of Energy's website. And I'm going, okay, this is
Oh,
like
interesting.
way like how weird is that? And yeah, I don't know how somebody would even come up with this heat signature. But Bob Grenier, he's an experimental engineer with low energy nuclear reactions, also known as cold fusion. He's the one who initially said, yeah, this is like a magnetic monopole. And so what you're seeing here is the non-radiating barrier, which is basically like the distance in which the magnetic field is containing the plasma inside of these orbs. So this is where it's not like a little person inside this. This is a field around it. And while the field can be relatively large, it's all based on electromagnetism in terms of how it's being contained within that area. And then where's the energy coming from? This is where it comes up with the idea of free energy is that you have to realize these things are able to extract energy from, we could call it the environment, but I would call it the 0 point vacuum field all around us. And perhaps all energy comes from that location as well. Now the last part here is when they complete and they teleport the plane. My current theory on exactly what's happening here, based on reading a bunch of scientific papers, specifically one by Hal Puthoff, is that you have a Coulomb repulsion, like taking magnets, trying to jam them together. You're gonna have them
Hmm.
shoot apart, and at the same time, you've got a Casimir attraction. So Casimir force would say you put two plates together, very close, they come together. So if you make a Casimir shell, you have this attraction, and then at the same time, while your charges are going together, you have this repulsion. And at the point where they equalize, theoretically, is your mouth of your wormhole. So let's look at that again. In fact, there's a slow mo here at the end. And this is the original video. It has all these slow mo things in it as well. Let me change the speed.
And for those that are just listening, I mean, this is like now a second angle. The plane's doing the same thing, and yeah, and these orbs just collapse in on the plane, and it's gone.
Yep, they collapse in. And actually, remember when I said they slow down on the satellite video? They
Hmm.
seem to reorient right here where you're seeing them kind of blur a little bit. This is them reorienting to prepare exactly for this zap. And then you can see the heat signatures reappear. And then right after the heat signatures reappear, after they blur for a second, they immediately start to converge. So now they're starting to converge. And sorry, it's just going kind of slow. And then I'm going to pause it right at the final frame before the zap. Look at it get blurry. The final frame
Hmm.
before the zap begins, the orbs flatten, consistent with what we would see from like a gravitational lensing effect around the black hole, and the plane blurs. And we actually took this and we mapped it over the frame right beforehand, and the plane gets tiny, like a little bit scrunched as
Huh.
well. Really interesting. And then if you look at the very next frame, like if you look at this, and for the people who are just listening, you're gonna see the plane like looks like it gets pulled backwards in the very first frame where the with this black hole, or it's not really a black hole, it's a wormhole, I suppose, opens up. The difference between a black hole and a wormhole, by the way, is that a wormhole doesn't have an event horizon. So there's no area where light cannot escape anymore. There's not this immense
Yeah.
gravitational pull. This is what makes wormholes humanly traversable. Where if you were to go to a black hole, you can't get out. You're gonna get ripped to shreds. So it looks like the plane goes backwards a little bit, and then it's only about 3 or 4 frames, and the whole thing's gone. So the plane disappears in basically a fraction of a second that's out there. I'll also do one more since we're doing a lot of video stuff. This is a comparison of those 2 frames where you can actually see the tail of the plane like sticking out on the first frame of this wormhole. And so it looks like the plane's slightly getting pulled backwards. This is important because the right hand rule in electrical engineering gives us a vector travel of backwards. And so a lot of people say, well, where's the plane? Well, if this plane's getting pulled backwards and this plane's traveling to the east based on mapping out the coordinates in the satellite video, then this plane's going to be pulled backwards somewhere to the west. And that's quite interesting because when you look at where there's this weird sighting in the Maldives. And where's the Maldives? The Maldives is over to the west of the Nicobar Islands. So we've estimated that this plane showed up somewhere to the west. I'll go ahead and just share that real quick as well. I know people love their visuals here.
Hmm.
So
This
if you're
is
not watching this, then
fascinating.
yeah. So this is the visual of where we think the plane went. So we've got this plane in the Nicobar Islands. If you guys are listening, you can pull up a map. where Catherine T sees it. We've got this plane going to the east. We see it getting sucked backwards to the west. And so we made this cone that shows, okay, if it's going to the west, approximately, where would that show up? Somewhere in the Indian Ocean, but not in the South Indian Ocean, somewhere near the Maldives. Now, a Boeing 777 fire suppression device washes up in the Maldives, gets completely ignored. Nobody really don't really look at it, they dismiss it, they won't say anything about it. The Maldives actually gets excluded from the search. Why would they exclude the Maldives from the search efforts? That's very bizarre. And then about 15 or 20 islanders, the numbers kind of differs. And this small island, they see the plane in the early morning hours flying from the west to the south. These people see the red and white stripe of Malaysian Airlines. They don't see jumbo jets on this tiny island of 3,000 people. And it's not like one or two people, it's like 15 people see the plane. And they also all get ignored as well. So
Did
where
they
do we
see the
think the
moment
plane
that it
went?
disappeared?
No, so nobody on record has said it. Now, Catherine T, I talked to her. Her sighting's interesting. Like, she seems like she went in to go put the kettle on. Something has to do with British people putting tea on or whatever, heating the tea up.
Mm-hmm.
And then she comes out and she doesn't see the plane anymore. And I don't know if she really saw it and she's too afraid to say so. Maybe she's blocked it out from a memory perspective. No idea.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but nobody on record has said that they saw the plane disappear. Now, if these people on the islands over here, they would have seen the plane reappear. But the important part about their sighting is the vector where they saw the plane flying to, which was to the south. Because when you look to the south, what's south of the Maldives? Oh, United States military base called Diego Garcia. Now, I was never a big conspiracy theorist guy. Um, and I never thought we would have crazy advanced technology like this. But when I started looking up other people's theories, especially the conspiracy theories, there's a repeat pattern. Most of them say the plane ended up at Diego Garcia military base. You've got this guy, Dickie Gregory, who is a comedian who has got this kind of famous viral video. He's passed away now, but it says that, military base Diego Garcia is where the plane ended up. Mark Dugain is a French author who investigated this plane for a few months and he wrote an article about it. Says the plane ended up there. Catherine T was on the record about in 2018, I think, where she says, "I now think that the plane ended up at Diego Garcia." If you listen to the actual family members of the victims, a lot of them say they think this plane was abducted or hijacked or taken by somebody. Just follow what the people are saying, guys, and you'll lead to the conclusion. The other big one that I want to point out is the French father, Guillaume Watrellos. If you look up his sighting, he was actually featured on the Netflix documentary. He was told by intelligence source that the Americans know exactly what happened to the plane and that they had two AWACS, which are these radar spy planes, in the area. So if you just listen to what the people
People were
say out there,
saying.
it's like, why do I think the plane ended up Diego Garcia? Because that's where all the circumstantial evidence says the plane ended up. I don't have any proof, but if I'm going to gamble, that's what I'm betting on.
Now, I guess the question is, why would they? Okay, so the theory is that there's a lithium ion, which for Bitcoiners that are listening, and if you follow me and I talk about Bitcoin mining, all that kind of stuff, and we talk frequently about how you can't store that energy anywhere. So, like you see, look at Teslas and like any of those vehicles, they catch on fire. Like you can't put it out. It's too hot to put out with water. It's a very bad situation. It's a reason why they're careful about what you bring on the planes with that have batteries, all that kind of stuff. Um, okay, so if it's on fire, why wouldn't they be okay with it just going into the ocean? Why would they
Exactly.
make it disappear?
So that's the big rub. So then the question is, why this cover up, especially if it's just a mundane event like a fire? Several planes burnt up. We never teleported them away, as far as I know.
Mm-hmm.
There's two schools of thought. One is they're trying to rescue the plane because maybe we're just noble. Maybe the government's just great and they wanted to rescue this plane. And then the other one is, well, this is like a show of force or a counter espionage mission. No matter how you look at it, if it's a rescue operation, there must be something important on this plane. And if you're teleporting away, there also must be something important on this plane. Well, there's 20 engineers from the company Freescale Semiconductors, which is an American company that produces very powerful microchips for U.S. aerospace and defense. They had just signed a contract a year before, tying them. We also found National Security Agency report from 2005 about superconductive microchips that references free-scale semiconductors several times in it, and the U.S. would have to invest in them to realize these superconductive microchips, which are used in quantum computers and basically all advanced technology nowadays. Superconductivity is a huge aspect of what we see in those videos, especially
Hmm.
respect to how the orbs operate and everything, where electrons flow freely, quantum macroscopic effects. So what I've independently found and what I've heard from other people is that those people were the reason for whatever happened to this plane. There might have been some cargo as well. So my best theory is they were taking the intellectual property. Maybe they even some of the microchips are related to this technology. They were taking that technology to China. They were defecting to China, or however you want to think of it. They might have had some of the microchips in the cargo with them as well, which would explain also why you don't want it to crash, because you want to retrieve that cargo and not let that cargo get to China either. And then it also might be a matter of show of force because intellectual property theft, the number one targets for international property theft is China or foreign nationals that work for American companies. And 8 of those engineers were Chinese nationals.
And they
The
were
other
confirmed on
12
the
Malaysian
plane.
nationals. Sorry?
They were confirmed on the plane.
100% confirmed. We actually went through every single passenger on board the plane and found out where they were all sitting as well. And all the pretty much all the Freescale semiconductor engineers were all sitting like right next to each other as well, which goes to show you something strange because companies like this have policies where you can only have so many people on one plane
Hmm.
just in case they disappear. Mine is actually my company is only 2 people of the same company on the same plane. And yet there's 20 of them and they're all sitting next to each other. So if they were booked through a travel agency, that could not have, it had to have triggered red flag warning where somebody would say, hey, FYI, we got 20 important people on board this plane. And it's not just me saying they're important. The company issued a formal statement saying these were very important people that were on board this plane as well. So similar to the Diego Garcia situation, like this was the reason why this plane, whatever happened to it. These are a clear and obvious motive related to it.
Huh. So these people with these engineers that have this technology that is has a U.S. military contract are potentially defecting to China with the technology. And are they, is the fire related to?
Yeah, so I would say that, maybe this is a show of force. One of the ways that they suppress stuff is that it's kind of theatrical. They make these plots like a play and they let it play out, especially with the intelligence communities. They don't want to get as hands-on with it. Now, in this case, it's hard to argue they didn't get really hands-on if that's what's tied to this, but you can imagine that they set this fire to divert the plane away from prying eyes, away from China and the South China Sea, because maybe they knew it would turn around. Maybe they knew that a lithium ion battery fire cannot be put out, but that also it would not going to destroy the plane immediately either. It's hard to say though. At the end of the day, only the United States government. I don't like to sit out here and speculate of the motivations of a 3-letter intelligence agencies and how they operate. I can just give you guys the facts and let you guys come to your own conclusions and stories. But in my opinion, the story that makes the most sense is that we set that plane on fire to divert it, and that this is also multi-purpose. Not only are we preventing these people from getting to China, but this is also a show of force because other countries also have satellites and surveillance systems. And maybe they're not as good as ours. Potentially, without these videos, they wouldn't be able to know exactly what we did to the plane, but they would know the United States did it. Russia's going to go, we didn't do it. And they're going to talk to China and go, China's going to go, we didn't do it either. And they're going to go, okay, the United States did this. Planes don't crash without leaving debris fields that are giant and visible from space. And then they're going to go, okay, the United States did this. Well, then they're going to go, what's the United States media saying? Well, the media is saying that it flew into the middle of nowhere. Like it was a rogue pilot that flew
Yeah.
into the middle of nowhere and crashed it without leaving a debris field. And they're going to know that's bullshit. But what are they going to say about it? Are they going to go on there and say the United States took the plane? What will happen? What we will do is we'll say, well, that has all the earmarks of Russian disinformation and Chinese disinformation. And people in this country are simply brainwashed, 100% brainwashed. and we would believe whatever our media tells us, especially when it comes to Russian disinformation. That's like the biggest buzzword ever, especially back in
Hmm.
2014. So you could say this is a show of force, because if you're Vladimir Putin and you see that the United States just disappeared a Boeing 777, and then they just had their media lie to the world about it, and all the Americans just ate it up. Like, yeah, it makes sense that a plane wasn't being tracked after flying for 8 hours and just flew in the middle of nowhere for no reason at all. And also, we searched there for 3 years and found nothing at all either. Like, how scared would you be to get on an airplane? Like, if I'm Vladimir Putin, I'm gonna be terrified to get on an airplane because it means the United States can wipe me out anytime they want, at any moment they want, and there's absolutely nothing we could do about it. And they would have the media lie about it too. In fact, there was a similar scenario. What happened to the Iran president? His helicopter just mysteriously crashed, and we just said, "Oh, it was the weather did it. The weather did it." Right after they had a massive missile strike on Israel, you know, it's like you could imagine that Vladimir Putin's plane just mysteriously crashes or disappears, right? So to me, you say this is like a show of force, and it wasn't even me that came up. Like, I independently thought this narrative made sense, but Joseph P. Farrell, like a week after this plane disappeared, went on an interview, and he was basically presented all of this. The only reason why he didn't really run with it that much is because he thought, well, why would they do this to this plane? He even had figured out that they had these engineers on board. He thought you can just shoot a missile at it if you want to destroy it. There's easier ways, which I don't disagree with.
Hmm.
But just because there's easier ways doesn't mean we wouldn't do that. So, um, yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, like the
Flexing your
motive again,
muscles.
yeah, it's like flexing your muscles a little bit. And then maybe we're doing it because maybe there's an experimental aspect to it. Maybe we haven't
See
really
what happens.
teleported a lot of planes with orbs, so we want to see, yeah, what happens, and because it's if the people don't make it, then whatever. And the last thing I want to say is that I don't think the people would die from this event because there's a bunch of scientific papers from 2020 and beyond about humanly traversable wormholes. Like I said, there's no event horizon, so you're not going to get spaghettified. But the fire is extremely toxic, more toxic than I even realized until recently. Because I pretty much post every lithium ion battery fire event that happens, especially the one in South Korea that happened a few weeks ago. 22, 23 people died in that. And that was a factory fire. You would think, couldn't they just get out the moment they see smoke? Because people underestimate the smoke. So they go and they try to put it out.
Hmm.
And one breath, they're out. Just like with UPS Flight 6. The captain tries to just go get an oxygen tank right behind his chair. And he's out just like that.
So
One
lithium
inhalation
ion
is all it
fire
takes
can
because
knock you
it's
out.
so toxic. Yeah. So you can imagine that even if it was being slowly dissipated through the passenger area, you're going to go to sleep pretty quick and you're never going to end up waking up again.
Yeah.
So
So they were probably the
so it's pretty
plane for the most
horrific.
part was probably already
And
dead.
people have speculated this. They'd speculated it was due to depressurization, but I don't think that it would have been due to the depressurization. I think it would be due to the smoke, because based on what we know about the flight path, the plane wasn't flying very high. It was flying low, and you would fly low because you're trying to get the fire out, but you're also trying to get oxygen for the passengers to be able to breathe. And you're trying to flush the smoke out because people are out there dying in the back. And for people that aren't aware, you can't really trust those oxygen masks that drop in the airplanes. At best, they last for 20 minutes. This plane was on fire for an hour, a little
Huh.
bit more than an hour before we get to that point. So that's the full story, the abbreviated version of the Malaysian airline situation. What I will say is I am very confident that this story will be proven to be true in the future. I think that the biggest hurdle is people's own skepticism and lack of open-mindedness to believe that this type of technology can exist. But from my research into the technology, not only does it 100% exist, there are even patents out there for it, including Salvatore Paez's patents that are co-signed off by the U.S. Navy. And there was a bunch of like fanfare about them a few years ago. And when you look at them through the light of those videos, you go, oh wow, those we do have this. The US Navy does have this. That's what those patents are all about. We're staring at it right there.
It's all there.
It's all just there. And that's the scary part, is that people say people that conspiracy theorists. They say your story makes no sense. You say it's suppressed, but you say it's also right there. Well, yes, that's what suppression is. That's what the whole word suppression means. I'm not saying it's non existent. I'm saying it's suppressed. I'm saying that it is right there. All you have to do is go look. All you have to do is go look at it and say, this is not fake. This is real. This is real patents supported by real science. But people don't do that. And that's why it's called suppression, is that the suppression is a matter of psychological effects, brainwashing, convincing people that this stuff is not possible and that it can't be real. And it's extremely powerful. You have people that say that and do that. It's like the Seinfeld episode is that you tell yourself to lie long enough and you begin to believe it.
Yeah.
This is what we've done to ourselves. And you'll ask people say, well, these are violating the laws of physics, it's violating the laws of conservation of energy and violating the second law of thermodynamics as well. But these people don't even know what those laws are. They
Yeah.
just think that, oh, those laws mean that free energy is not possible. But no, it's much more complicated than that. Like if there is this reservoir unlimited energy, we're not violating conservation of energy. We're borrowing that energy from one location, and that energy is showing up somewhere else. The same way where the plane is going from one location and appearing somewhere else. The energy is not being created or destroyed, just being borrowed. And the second law of thermodynamics, people don't realize, is like the scenario. It says in a closed system, your heat always flows to your cold area. And this is why a system cannot be 100% perfectly efficient, because in any closed system, you always lose a little bit of energy due to entropy. So heat dissipating because it's not perfectly efficient. But then I would say, well, if you look at it from that perspective and you say, well, what about a windmill? I've got a windmill in my closed windmill system. It can't possibly produce energy because the windmill is not producing any energy, but it takes an external input, the wind. The wind comes in and now we convert that into energy. And then you say, okay, well, but it can't be more efficient than the wind is. The wind is your limiting factor. Okay, well, what if 0 point energy all around us that's practically infinite, is our input? Now, how much energy can I get out? Infinite, because that's how much energy is coming into it. So it becomes just simply a matter of how do we create our system and define our system so that we can have something where we are using this external source and not fossil fuels and wind and all and solar and all this stuff, but just the energy that's out there everywhere all around us. And I'm also not talking about like the energy of the earth, or I'm not talking about the energy in the air or whatever. I'm talking about the energy that created our universe, that is out there everywhere, that we simply don't perceive because that's such a small scale.
Hmm. So how you're gonna have to break this down a little bit for me because
Sure.
as a Bitcoiner, my ears perk up whenever I, hear with Bitcoin mining and that being something I do a lot of. When I hear free energy, I'm like, oh, okay. I mean, I remember there was this Twitter video of a farmer that had poked they were venting gas out of a cow and like the methane, and they had like a needle with like a little fuse on it, and like you could see like almost like a look like a butane torch, like just a small one coming off. I don't know where that thumbs up came from, but so the butane, like just this little bit, and I was sitting there like, oh, now all I'm thinking about is how can I mine Bitcoin off of like vented gas out of cows, like um and I remember, I mean, I was fascinated with, I've been following your thread since, probably 9 months or whatever, uh, but yeah, then you were like, there's free energy here. And I do think about that, you know, from the perspective of, and then like I'll go down a little bit of like kind of a rabbit hole, but because I'm not, conspiracy theorist, you know what I mean? Like where it's like, flat earthers, like my streaming platform, we had flat earth documentaries on there, and I'm like, to each their own, like, you can believe what you want. But I do like to follow evidence. And a friend of mine who, he's like probably the smartest person I know. I mean, definitely is. And we've been going down for years now the rabbit hole of human history and how human history is not what we really know. And a lot of it comes to Egypt, the pyramids, um, all that kind of stuff. And the pyramids looking more like power plants, things of that nature. So I want to throw that out there. Like, is it is that a possibility that this is an ancient technology that we've maybe rediscovered? Or, I mean, I don't know if you've ever thought of that before, but I don't know how much you've gone down like the ancient Egypt. I mean, to me, Egypt was definitely flooded, which also lines up with the floods, the flood myths around the world. Also, one that's notable in the Bible. Um, so, it, just something, some things don't add up, and there's some multiple angles there with like Bitcoin mining. I'm like, yeah, free energy. Like, let's get these orbs spinning around a Bitcoin miner, and just mine for free. But is there, looking back to the ancient, like there's talk of how the pyramids were built using resonance and vibration to lift, rocks that were humanly possible to lift up. I don't know. Do you think there's an angle here where this is an ancient technology that's basically resurfaced?
Yeah, first thing I'll say is that I'd be shocked if there weren't people mining Bitcoin with free energy already today. I already know for a fact that there are engineers that work in black projects that know the real science, and real physics, and not just one, several that they sell over Unity, is what we call it, devices, to people behind the scenes, mostly rich people, because these devices are pretty expensive.
Mm-hmm.
But so what, and if you have this excess energy, then one of the big things is like, what do you do with the excess? I don't really want to send it back to the grid, because I don't want the energy company to be wondering why I'm producing, or why I'm sending them energy back when I don't have any
Yeah.
devices. They're going to wonder there's something wrong. So what do you do instead? Well, you use it to mine Bitcoin and stuff like that, that's energy intensive. Um,
So
and
what
then
was that device you were talking about?
the over Unity, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, so over Unity. So over Unity is just it's a fancy word for free energy device, because when it comes to free energy, it's not that it's really just free. When we talk about free energy, we're talking about free energy freely extracted from all around us. But to produce such a device, this can be very, very expensive. I think that some of these devices that people promote can cost millions of dollars, and others hundreds of thousands of dollars. So who has the money to pay for that? And then every fixed cost becomes variable over a period of time as well. So then it becomes this issue of, based on how much it costs for the device and how much money I'd be saving in terms of how much power it generates, where's the cost benefit analysis? Much like with stuff like solar panels that people do.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so absolutely, like, I already know that it's already out there. In fact, I'm a partial owner of a company where we have a magnetic motor device as well that produces over Unity. And over Unity just means coefficient of performance greater than one, which most people think is impossible, because they say, oh, the laws of thermodynamics say it's not possible. But we'd already explained why you can get around those laws of thermodynamics in order to make it possible. And it should be apparent when you look at magnets in general that there's something there. And if you're more interested in that, I would say check out especially my streams that I do on Friday, Free Energy Friday, where we go over
Mm-hmm.
all the concepts. I've given people more than enough clues and hints in terms of being able to figure it out. Not every free energy device that's out there is fake. A lot of them probably are. But when you look at the really smart people that are out there, the ones that have worked, that are connected to the government, et cetera, the two people that I would say is you should check out is probably Tom Bearden, who explains it very, very well, including the means of suppression. And I would say check out Bendini as well. I think that those are some guys that really understand the concepts correctly, and check out their work that's out there. There's others I think that are legit. There's Kepler Aerospace, for example, company with hundreds of millions of dollars of investment, has something called the MEC. I forget what it stands for exactly, but they literally just openly promote it as a device that produces huge amounts of free energy. It has a mass reduction effect, loses weight, and also cools down as well. These are the three criteria for when you have very, very powerful effects, because what's happening is they're extracting the energy from the vacuum all around us. So
Mm-hmm.
again, when you pull energy out of here, energy must show up over here. So this area should cool down, and I'll talk a little bit more about that science in a second. But to answer your question, I'm really fascinated by the ancient history stuff. I'm not an expert in any way. I haven't done a huge amount of research, but like you, I've heard a lot of the same stuff that, like, how did we build the pyramids? Are the pyramids a tomb? I don't think so. I think that the pyramids being a power plant makes way more sense than them being a tomb, personally. I think that human history is way too short. We only can go back like 10,000 years at most. But look at how advanced we are, not just
Yeah.
technologically, but as beings. It's like you're trying to tell me that our human history only goes back 10,000 years. I don't believe you. You know, it's like this seems like a long period of time. So you start thinking of it in terms of generations, and you're like, well, it's actually really not that long. You know, it should be. I feel like our recorded history should go back hundreds of thousands of years,
Hmm.
and it doesn't. So I wonder about a lot of that. Another thing too is that when it comes to anti-gravity effects, there's more than one way to skin the cat, so to speak. And there are videos out there, one that I've posted several times, that talks about using sound to pull it off as well. And what you're trying to do is you're trying to get a second order effect. My buddy Dave Rossi would say that it's like when you have the mom and the mom and the dad make a baby, and you have this second order effect happen. So you can take sound with the right resonance, look up cymatics, for example, can theoretically create a situation where you have this second order effect happen, where you can have like a levitation type effect happen. And they've actually used very powerful sound between these like subwoofers or types of beams, and they can literally just move objects around with the
What?
sound. So you
Huh.
imagine like what even low tech you might be able to pull off some kind of sound resonance. And I think there's stuff where people use like bowls of water and spin around them, and they might be able to do that. So I do think that the reason why I think this technology can be very old is that this is the basis for this physics doesn't require some magical invention. It's a discovery. And discoveries are things that don't require a certain amount of time to figure out. It's a matter of perception of the universe. And what is science? People forget what science really means. Science is the study of observable reality. Science isn't, oh, this is what I read in my textbook. This is it. It's like, no, when I actually go and do something, what's the
Hmm.
reaction? And how do we explain that? The difference between physicists and engineers is that physicists look at what the theories say and they try to build based on what they were told. Engineers look backwards. They go, here's what's happening. Now I need to figure out how to and reverse engineer it and figure
Yeah.
out how it operates.
How did we
Uh,
get to this point?
how did we get to that point? Yeah, exactly. So, yes, if this science is true and real, then you could imagine even an ancient civilization. Now, they might not have the same material science that we have in terms of manufacturing, in terms of making an iPhone. Like, they can't produce this, but can they understand how those effects work and maybe induce those effects through other means? Absolutely. I think it's certainly possible. And then just to go back to the other point about the science in general. So people want to doubt me on the science. I've already challenged everybody that's out there. I've challenged people on the videos. I've challenged people on the missing plane. And I've also challenged any mainstream academic scientist who wants to talk about physics about it. And I just keep getting better and better every single day on the physics. I spend almost all my free time reading scientific papers. So this is what I'll tell you guys. Check out Sakharov, 1958 or 68, I think it was, came up with this theory of that 0 point energy can explain gravity. So we know there's 0 point energy out there. Casimir found out that if you take two plates together, put them really narrow together, there's this pressure differential. Now that's really interesting. How can plates just come together like that? Which because they're next to each other, because they're shielding certain wavelengths of the 0 point energy between them, which creates a pressure differential. There's more wavelengths on the outside than there are on the inside, causes the plates to come together. So
Huh.
this then Hal Puthoff. If you look at Hal Puthoff's work, I mean, it's basically just a roadmap for how you get to anti-gravity, especially if you just start from like the 80s. So in 1989, Hal Puthoff came around and said, I'm going to show the math consistent with Einstein's general relativity that Sakharov was correct. That gravity is explained from the 0 point fluctuations in 0 point energy. Gravity is just an induced effect. Gravity is not its own separate force that is, with the other forces. It's just an induced effect of energy. So what we have to do to think of this is that we have to realize that when we look at the vacuum of space-time, we think that absolute zero is nothing in space-time. There's nothing there. But we know 0 point energy exists even in an absolute vacuum of zero. So really, we need to think of the vacuum as an equilibrium somewhere up here. And what this means is we can add energy to it or you can remove energy from it. Now, when we remove energy from it, what does that sound like? Well, it sounds like negative energy. And if we add energy to it, this is like adding mass, like adding a planet or something like that. And energy is mass because E equals mc squared. So we can actually get gravitational effects from energy itself. Einstein said this. So we can look and now we can interchange mass and gravity. So if we add mass, we get what? Positive gravity, the gravity that we feel everywhere else around us. If we reduce it, then we get a repulsive effect. Now, what is a repulsive effect of gravity? Anti-gravity. I don't call it anti-gravity because it's not like shielding the gravity. You're really manipulating gravity, right? You are causing gravitational effects. So now imagine a balloon. If I squeeze on this side of the balloon in space-time, I get an expansion over here. Or going back to the plane scenario, take a turkey baster. Turkey baster has a bulb on one side, it's got a long tube. Squeeze the tube, what happens? Stuff shoots out over here. So if I were to remove the energy in front of me, let's say this is over in front of me, remove this energy away, what should happen then is I should have this force act behind me that pushes me forward. Actually, I found a video where Hal Puthoff literally talks about this.
Huh.
This is what gravity really is a manipulation of the 0-point energy fields. And this is what connects all of these concepts together. This is how we can have a warp drive, because what's a warp drive? Like we see in these videos. And in fact, I'm going to share one more with you right now. One thing I didn't point out about the orbs in the drone video is that you can see the dark lines in front of them. Why are there these dark, cold lines in front of the orbs here? You can see them very clearly in this
Mhm.
color changed version. You can see these lines are in front of the orbs, not behind them. They look like they're behind them. They're actually in front because they're creating a negative energy zone in front of the orb. So just like I explained, if you were to remove the energy in front, what's going to happen? Your object's going to fall into it, like literally following its own geodesic path, its own gravitational path.
Huh.
That's why we see this is what warp drive is. That's what real warp drive looks like. Is that you basically are contracting the space in front of you, or you're creating a negative energy zone in front of you. That's why it's cold. That's why it's dark in this video. And I have another quick version as well that shows it. Let me pull that one up. And then what is creating? What is a wormhole then? Then a wormhole is simply removing all, just making it like basically a void, taking all the 0-point fluctuations and just vacating them or shielding that entire area from the 0-point fluctuations. And I would say people need to read that Hal Puthoff paper from 1989 because it gives away some stuff in there that I can't even really talk about just for other reasons. But that paper has some of the secrets in it, guys. Sorry, I'm looking for this video here. Oh crap, I have so many.
I can only imagine you have a handful of these videos on your computer.
Oh yeah, I've got a million of them. You know what? I might not. Oh, there it is. I just saw it. Okay, here it is. Okay, so again, look at the trails. You can see the trails in front of, or the lines in front of the orbs very clearly in this version. This is my favorite colorized version of the drone video. And people manually change these color channels, but they still show the same details. So yeah,
Kind of
so
like
this is
if you are like in a pool and you like move your hand in front of something and it follows along.
it's exactly like that. And why is it exactly like that? Because the water is a medium, and so is space-time. And instead of water, it's just energy. What even is inertia, right? And inertia is like why can the plane only go so fast? Because it's running through a fluid. Inertia is explained as just like when I move my hand, why does it not move infinitely fast? Because I'm moving through the 0-point energy field.
Yeah.
Everywhere we go, we're doing that. That's what inertia is in general. And so we are just fish that are in a fish tank, and we don't even realize we're in the fish tank because physics once upon a time went the vacuum of the vacuum of space is empty, but it's not. It's not empty. And once we realize it's not empty, welcome to free energy, welcome to warp drives, welcome to wormholes. All of these things become possible. And then with respect to the wormhole, the only question in my mind is how do you determine where the plane goes? If you vacate all the 0-point energy field in this area using the Casimir effect, a Casimir shell, and now everything inside is just a void. There's no 0-point energy inside there anymore. True zero in terms of our scale. Okay, you've disappeared, but now where are you going to show up?
You
To
need to
me,
reappear somewhere.
yeah, you need to reappear somewhere, right? So to me, the answer is entanglement. This is another concept in quantum physics, is that you entangle two particles, and whatever happens to one, there's an either equal or opposite, some type of, we can measure the reaction of another entangled pair. This is why you see this sign up here. It says four orbs. Not only is my name Ashton Forbes, like four orbs,
Huh.
because we see three orbs in our video. What if there's a fourth orb somewhere else over here? You entangle these orbs to this orb, and now our slingshot knows where to go, and it knows where to show up now. So it disappears out of space time over here, and then it reappears in space time over here, based on wherever that fourth orb is. And maybe it's also based on this vector of travel, and it's going back this way, but it's got to reappear at some point. Otherwise, it's just going around the Earth, through the vacuum or through the ether or the extra dimension that's out there. One more thing I just forgot, which I want to point out: the unification of gravity and electromagnetism has been out there since at least 1926. 1926, 98 years ago. That's when Kaluza Klein added an extra dimension to unify it. And back then, you know what these people were calling the extra dimension? The ether. They were calling in the ether this extra dimension that has what? A sea of energy in it. It's like Tesla was talking about it back in the early 1900s as well. And it gets like discredited due to this Michelson-Morley experiment that was done in 1885. But it's funny because if you take the same interferometer, they take this interferometer, you can spin it around and you don't see the interference pattern move. You take the same interferometer, turn it on its side. So instead of spinning this way, spins this way. Now the interferometer moves. You see, or the interference pattern moves and shifts. And it shifts consistent with perpendicular to or parallel to the plane of the Earth, which would indicate that maybe there is an ether and that the ether is explained by gravity because basically it's pushing down, not pushing this way, it's pushing down around us all around. So now this connects the idea of gravity to 0 point energy, to the ether, and to the Michelson-Morley experiment. And now if we interpret that Michelson-Morley experiment from a vertical spin instead of a horizontal one, now the Michelson-Morley says, turns out the ether is real now. And it's connected to gravity, which we just also connected to the 0 point energy field. So I literally dare anybody to try to prove any of this wrong. And I understand that's not where that burden of proof is. It should be on me. But I
Mm-hmm.
also don't claim to be a scientist and I don't claim to be an expert. I just claim to be a guy that saw the answers in two videos. And that's going to end up being the truth because those videos are real. And it may take people a long time to figure that out. But that's totally fine. I'm just setting myself up to a situation where when the science does prove those videos are real, which it will from the public perspective, that people can't come back then and say, well, Ashton was just guessing or whatever bullshit people are going to try, excuses people are going to try to come up with. Because no, I said very clearly, this is how it worked. I even explained it scientifically. And then people will come to the logical conclusion that obviously those military videos that were leaked to the public must have been real because we never found the plane.
Yeah. Um. Yeah. I mean, the whole thing never made sense. And the funny, like, so my brother has a master's in physics education, so I cannot wait for him to
Watch this.
watch this and then sit down because it is really funny because I mean, I joke with him and like tease him because he also teaches um astronomy, so I'll tease him about like the flat Earth. Like I just like like I don't believe the Earth is flat, but I just I know that if I say something about it, it'll get him like riled up. Um, but I mean, I don't know. Maybe he would be interested. It would be fascinating to do a conversation because I mean, he's not like a physicist, but it is. It just to me makes sense. Um, you know, like everything. You know, we don't have. They say when we have all the carbon in this atmosphere. You know what I mean? Like we're all carbon beings, and when they say they want to limit the carbon, I'm like, I think we're the carbon they want to limit. And you look at trees, and you're like, what are the odds that there are these things that come out of the ground, and the exact thing that they need to breathe is the exact thing that we expel out of our bodies, and vice versa. And so it's like there's this relationship between like a trade-off of like if there's always like if you're a Star Wars fan, which I am, there's always an equal, there's always for
Symmetry, right?
every. Yeah. So there's something And that's just to me, energy wise, it makes sense.
Well,
And
let me add some more on there too, because what I say is, so, and for your brother, and no disrespect at all, because I already know the types of arguments people make. So I've already addressed, I think, the laws of thermodynamics. It's not a matter of really violating them. It's more a matter of looking at it a little differently. And once you realize there's a 0 point energy field all around us, it becomes a lot easier to understand how we kind of get around the laws of thermodynamics. The other thing people say, well, energy can't come from nowhere. Well, where did all the energy in the universe come from then? Where did all
mhm,
the mass in the universe come from? And then how do you explain the Big Bang? How did the universe expand faster than the speed of light if people think that we can't travel faster than the speed of light? Well, because the medium is expanding, and dark energy is negative energy. It is the 0 point energy. This unifies all the concepts that we currently don't really understand or respect that are out there. And then what I would ask people is, this is going to sound fundamental and this should wake people up, is where does energy come from? Like the energy that I'm using right now, the energy in this light, the energy up here, where does this come? A lot of people don't even realize how power works. Is
mhm,
that when we are burning stuff, we're not directly converting that to electricity. We usually have it like, for example, in nuclear power, it's a very indirect route. It's like we use it to heat up water to produce steam to spin a turbine. You're
mhm,
like, wait, what? So basically, at the end of the day, we're just making a generator. And what does the generator do? Separates charges. And that's like, imagine a battery. You have your positive on your top and you have your negative on your bottom. You connect it to a circuit, and then what happens? The negative tries to go the long amount way to get to the positive. You create an asymmetry. Remember, we were just talking about symmetry? You create an
mhm,
asymmetry. There's more negative charges here. So then what's going to happen? They're going to try to get around. The moment this happens, power begins to flow, energy begins to flow. And when does it run out? When that symmetry becomes, when that symmetry is broken down, or basically, or symmetry is recreated, where now there's no more negative charges down here, where it equalizes out. That's when the battery is dead. That's when we no longer get energy out of it. So what are power plants doing? They're keeping your dipole open. They're keeping your battery asymmetrical. That's all that happens. All the coal that we burn, the oil, all the nuclear power, even all the wind and all of the solar, all does this same thing. None of these have ever added 1 watt to the electric to the power lines. All they're doing is they're keeping that dipole open, recreating that dipole over and over and over again, and then the energy just flows.
mhm,
So the question from an engineering perspective should be, how do we keep the dipole open without constantly having to rebuild it like that? And the thing that I always go back to is, well, magnets seem like the most obvious way. Why? Because a magnet is a dipole that's permanently open. The magnet doesn't close. You always, whenever you have a magnet, you have this field around it. So what if we could use a magnet, because there's a connection between electricity and magnetism, or yeah, because we call it electromagnetism. So what if we can manipulate that to somehow keep this dipole open by putting less energy into it than what we're generally getting out of it? This goes back to the idea of free energy. If you really dig down to the free energy devices that actually work, you're going to find that that's their mechanism. One thing that I tell people, a good analogy, is a swing. The way that I would imagine a swing, I'm going to turn to the side to explain it better for people.
mhm,
The way that we produce power right now is we're constantly pushing on the swing back and forth. But is that the efficient way to push on a swing? Is that how you push on a swing? That's not how I push on the swing. Do you follow the person on the swing and push them back and forth? No. I wait till the swing's up here, and then I push on it. And then the swing goes there. And I certainly don't push on the swing when it's up here, because now it's working against me. So if you look at it like that, oh, I'm just going to push on the swing when it gets to the right point, and then it's just going to keep going perpetually. Now I'm using much less energy to keep that swing flowing. This is how I would look at it with respect to producing a free energy device. And that's how I think that pretty much all the free energy devices, no matter what their design is, are operating something like that. So the last thing I'll say on it is that don't think of a free energy device as something that has no input. It doesn't require no input. That's not how free energy devices need to operate. You can have an input. You can use power. As long as you get more out than you put in, you're good to go. So it becomes a matter of using the power input efficiently. Again, the swing up here, instead of a situation where you're constantly pushing on the swing.
and then but then you're pulling that energy from somewhere, right?
So technically, Yeah, you're using the energy but the energy is all coming from somewhere else. Like think of it in terms of like the water table. When I drink the water, is it gone? No, because
No.
then I urinate it out or it becomes steam and then it rains back down onto the earth. You should look at energy the same way.
Huh.
Energy is eventually going back to the same location where it came from. So all energy that we use is all coming from the ether at that point, no matter what, no matter where it is. And therefore, then all systems are in theory a negative entropy resistor, where it's just pulling energy from the vacuum. And it just becomes a matter of engineering it to the point. I think that there's probably ways where you can do it where you get coefficient of performances that are beyond comprehension, but any coefficient of performance even greater than one is great. I think that it starts to become economically practical when you start getting over two or over three coefficient of performance, which means you're getting twice as much energy out as that you're putting into your system. And then the last thing I'll say is that the secret seems to be based on resonance. So again, going back to the swing scenario, if you were to look at the time factor, you would say, okay, well, every 1 second I'm pushing on the swing. Every time the swing comes back, I'm pushing on it. So now you need to develop a system where it's just in this specific resonance every time you're adding your little bit of energy input at the exact right moment. And then you now can take that little bit of energy that you're putting into it to keep your dipole open. As long as that dipole is open, power is flowing, energy is basically being I almost think of it being like conduited out of the ether into our observable reality, so to speak. But the energy was always there. We just never really perceived it. Oh, and then one last thing is that Richard Feynman, who worked on the Manhattan Project, you'll see a lot of people reference a quote from him, which
Mm-hmm.
is this is a little bit paraphrasing, but the idea that there is enough energy in this coffee cup here to boil all the Earth's oceans. In this area of volume of the 0 point energy of the vacuum. Just in this, it might be even smaller than this, frankly. So if you look at things like that, people say, well, it takes this huge amount of energy to produce a black hole or to, theoretically use a wormhole. But once you realize that, like, well, that's fine. It can use a lot of energy, but we've got enough energy to boil all the Earth's oceans in just this tiny area here. Then you start to realize that the amount of energy is not even a problem. Whereas an unlimited sea of energy. And our civilization never is going to be big enough to ever have any appreciable impact on that sea of energy. It's like taking little teaspoons of water from the ocean and imagine you're going to drain the ocean with it.
Yeah.
Not possible, right?
Huh. Wow. This has been fascinating.
Yeah.
Ashton, I really appreciate you coming on the show. And, again, I mean, there's just mysteries. I love following, mysteries and things like that. Like it is fascinating. And that's how you get to this point. But there's also, whenever I saw the two different videos and the two different angles and everything line up, I was like, I don't know. That kind of looks like something happened. And then just following your work has just been appreciated because I'm sure from a distance people go, oh, this is conspiracy nutso stuff, but it's just fascinating science, and you're just exploring the world, and that's the way that we should be doing it. So where can people follow you, and where can they watch your streams and everything?
Yeah, you can check me out on Twitter and on YouTube. It's at JustXAshton. Both of those locations. I've been streaming 3 nights a week, and I'm mostly focused on the science at this point, but I still do some investigative stuff in MH370, answer questions like we did on this stream as well. And I totally understand people that say, "Oh, there's conspiracy," but the people that do that, I would ask them to look at their own biases. Well, what is your scientific basis for making those arguments? A lot of times, it's actually based on dogmas that you were told not to believe something's real, and you're just dismissing something without actually looking into it. That's why I referenced a lot of the scientists and papers I mentioned, because then
Mm-hmm.
you go look at them and you realize this is actually based on real science. This isn't voodoo, and this is not fiction either. So, as long as you keep an open mind, I think that's the most important thing. Is that the problem isn't that the information is not out there. Information is out there. A lot of these free energy devices have been out there as well. Is they've just been suppressed, ridiculed, and ignored. And then the real issue is that we just need to wake up. We just have to wake up from our sleep. And when we do that, then we can be in Star Trek world. So I look forward to it.
I know, me too. I mean, as a kid who has been wanting to use the force his entire life, let's make it happen. So, Ashton, thanks for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Corey.
Thanks again to Ashton for joining. It's a fascinating conversation, really interesting rabbit hole. And just I found it entertaining. And if half of what he's saying is true, then holy cow. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I hope you guys get a Bitbox O2 hardware wallet, and I will talk to you later.